In 1955, the United States government built an entire American town for one purpose: to destroy it. Yucca Flat, Nevada. Houses, cars, power lines, a radio station, even a school bus. And families. Mannequin mothers, fathers, and children posed at the dinner table and tucked into bed. They called it Survival Town. The reporters called it Doom Town. 5:10 a.m., May 5th, 1955. 29 kilotons, fired from a 500-foot tower, over twice Hiroshima. It went out live on television. An estimated 100 million Americans watched. The message was meant to reassure: build the right house, stock the right pantry, and your family survives. It did the opposite. America had just watched its own suburb annihilated in about 2 seconds. 9 years later, the government quietly reissued this film with a disclaimer attached. The hydrogen bomb was now 250 times more powerful. Survival was no longer the lesson. The houses were never demolished. 2 of them still stand in the Nevada desert, 70 years on. You can book a tour. The mannequins are gone. The living rooms are still there. In 1946, the men who built the atomic bomb made a film. It was a warning about themselves. 1 year after Hiroshima, physicists from the Manhattan Project funded a 9-minute animated short. They wanted the public to see exactly what they had built, so they animated a single bomb falling on New York. Then a skull drawn over the city. Then Chicago. Then San Francisco. This wasn't government propaganda. It was closer to a confession. The companion book carried essays by Einstein, Oppenheimer, and Niels Bohr. It sold 100,000 copies. Their demand was radical. Surrender every atomic weapon to a single global authority. One world or none. The world said no. In 1949, the Soviet Union tested its own bomb. By 1986, there were more than 70,000 nuclear warheads on Earth. Every warning about the arms race came true. But the one they feared most has not. 80 years, 9 nuclear states, not one weapon used in war. The film wasn't wrong. It's still waiting for an answer.
To a city and its people.
These soldiers were ordered into trenches 2 miles from an atomic bomb, then ordered to walk toward it. Camp Desert Rock, Nevada. Between 1951 and 1957, the U.S. Army ran 8 exercises here. The question wasn't whether the bomb worked. It was whether men could still follow orders after watching one go off. One veteran described the flash. He said he could see the bones in his own arm and the skeletons of the men beside him. Their protection was a helmet and a small badge that measured the dose. Many of those badges were later lost. Then they went home, and here is where it stops being a story about a bomb. Every man was sworn to secrecy, not for 5 years, for 50. Breaking it carried 10 years in prison. They could not tell their wives, they could not tell their children, and when the cancers came, they could not tell their doctors. Here's the part that broke them. The tests were on television. Newspapers printed the photographs. The whole country watched. Only the men who were there had to stay silent. Congress lifted the oath in 1996, 40 years late. Most of them were already dead. Of roughly 400,000 atomic veterans, about 400 are still alive. This footage was never classified. Their voices were. You know the word bikini. It was named after this place, 4 days after the United States dropped an atomic bomb on it. Bikini Atoll in the Marshall Islands. In 1946, 167 people lived here. A Navy Commodore gathered them after church. He asked them to leave their home for the good of mankind and to end all world wars. Their leader, King Judah, agreed. "We will go," he said, believing that everything is in the hands of God. But that moment you've seen in the newsreels, it never happened that way. The Navy went back a month later and restaged it for the cameras. 7 takes. They kept prompting him, and 7 times Judah would say nothing more than, "We are willing to go. Everything is in God's hands." They were shipped to Rongerik, an island 1/6 the size that Marshallese tradition held was cursed. Within 2 years, they were starving. 23 more detonations followed. 3 of Bikini's islands were vaporized completely. They no longer exist. They were allowed home once, in the 70s. 4 years later, doctors found cesium in their bodies and evacuated them again. 80 years later, Bikini Atoll is still empty. Their 4,000 descendants have never gone home. The word went everywhere. The people never came back. In 1960, the U.S. Air Force made a film to reassure its own airmen that nuclear weapons were safe to fly with. 4 months later, it almost lost North Carolina. The film is called Stay Safe, Stay Strong. It was shown to the men who loaded and flew live hydrogen bombs every single day. Its message was simple. The weapon has multiple independent safety switches. It cannot detonate by accident. Not in a fire, not in a crash. To prove it, they deliberately crashed a bomber and set it on fire. The message to the airmen? Trust the engineering. January 24th, 1961. A B-52 breaks apart in the sky over Goldsboro, North Carolina. It is carrying 2 Mark 39 hydrogen bombs. As the fuselage spins, centrifugal force pulls the release lanyard, exactly as a crewman would to drop a bomb on an enemy city. One bomb behaved exactly as designed for war. Its parachute opened, its trigger mechanisms engaged. 3 of its 4 safety mechanisms failed. On impact, it sent a firing signal to the core. 1 switch stopped it. A single low-voltage switch. 4 megatons. 260 times Hiroshima. Fallout would have reached Washington, Baltimore, Philadelphia, New York. For 52 years, the government insisted there had never been any real danger. Then, in 2013, a memo was declassified. A senior weapons safety engineer had written it in 1969. He titled it, How I Learned to Mistrust the H-Bomb. His conclusion was 1 sentence. 1 simple, low-voltage switch stood between the United States and a major catastrophe. In 1950, the U.S. government made a film to convince Americans that radiation was nothing to panic about. At the same time, it was secretly injecting Americans with plutonium. It's called Medical Aspects of Nuclear Radiation, sponsored by the Air Force Special Weapons Project. It opens with sunbathers by a swimming pool. Radiation, it explains, is ordinary. You get it from the sun. The human body becomes a friendly cartoon factory. Little workers in each department going about their business. Then comes the real argument. A pie chart. 85% worry, 15% deaths. The message, your fear is the bigger problem. Watch closely, and the film names it. Plutonium. Labeled right there in the diagram of your own lungs. Because between 1945 and 1947, Manhattan Project doctors injected 18 people with plutonium, hospital patients, men, women, and a child. None of them were told. None of them consented. They were studied to work out how much plutonium a nuclear worker could survive. Most died without ever knowing. One woman lived 29 more years, sick constantly, dismissed by her own family as a hypochondriac. Her grandson learned the truth in 1992, 17 years after she was buried. A reporter named Eileen Wellsome spent 6 years finding their names. She'd won the Pulitzer. The president apologized in 1995. It made almost no news. The verdict in the O.J. Simpson trial came the same day. In the 1950s, newsreels promised the atom would power your home, cure your illnesses, and drive your ships. All of that was true. That's the problem. This is News Magazine of the Screen. Cinema audiences watched it between features, and the story it told was optimism. The first atomic submarine. Reactors that would make electricity too cheap to meter. Isotopes that could find a tumor. In 1953, President Eisenhower stood before the United Nations and made it policy. It was called Atoms for Peace. America would give away reactors, fuel, and nuclear training to friendly nations. Peaceful use only. That was the deal. One of those reactors went to India. Canada built it. America supplied the heavy water. It was for research. On the 18th of May, 1974, India detonated a nuclear device in the Rajasthan desert. The plutonium came from that reactor. They called it a peaceful nuclear explosion. Years later, the man who led the project admitted the truth. It was a bomb. It was not all that peaceful. India's bomb pushed Pakistan to build one. And here is the part that should have been obvious. A committee had warned Washington in 1955. Give a country plutonium, it said, and it will go into the weapons business. They named the country in the warning. India. They went ahead anyway. The peaceful atom did exactly what it promised. It just kept a promise nobody meant to make. You have probably walked past one of these signs. Black and yellow. Fallout shelter. There are still thousands of them bolted to buildings across America. Almost none of them lead anywhere. This is about fallout, made in 1963 by the Office of Civil Defense. Its job was to explain the plan. In 1961, President Kennedy wrote to every reader of Life magazine. The government would survey every public building in the country and mark the ones that could shelter you. They made 1.4 million signs. 200,000 buildings were designated. Schools, libraries, city halls. Each one was supposed to hold 2 weeks of water, survival biscuits, medical kits, and a radiation meter. Here is what actually happened. Only about a third of them were ever stocked. Within months, there were reports of leaking water drums and shelters that had received nothing at all. By 1971, the government stopped stocking them. By 1974, the program was quietly allowed to lapse. Eventually, they stopped keeping a list. Some of the biscuits were shipped abroad as aid. In New York, a farmer fed his to pigs, but nobody took down the signs. They stayed up for 50 more years, pointing at basements with nothing in them. In 2017, New York City finally began removing them from schools, because someone might actually follow one. And here is the strangest part. A disaster planner at Columbia put it plainly. Protecting yourself from fallout is more relevant now than it was at the peak of the program. The old concrete buildings still work. The shielding was always real. It was the promise that was empty. In the 1960s, the United States seriously planned to dig a second Panama Canal using 250 nuclear bombs. This is Project Dugout, a Lawrence Radiation Laboratory film, testing whether you could excavate the Earth by detonating a row of charges in a line. It worked. The blast carved a trench 300 feet long in a single second. The program was called Plowshare, from the Bible. They shall beat their swords into plowshares. The ambitions were extraordinary. A harbor blasted into the Alaskan coast. A highway cut through the mountains of the Mojave with 22 atomic bombs. And the big one, a sea-level canal across Central America. 27 separate detonations, some of them 11 megatons each, hundreds of times Hiroshima. A presidential study concluded it would be faster and cheaper than conventional digging. This was not a fringe idea. It was federal policy. Then came the results. One test vented radioactive steam over the very press gallery invited to watch it prove how safe it was. Another displaced 12 million tons of soil and sent a radioactive dust cloud 12,000 feet into the sky, drifting toward the Mississippi. 27 tests, 35 detonations, $770 million. The engineering worked almost every time. That was never the problem. The holes were radioactive. You could dig a harbor in an afternoon, and then nobody could ever use it. Plowshare ended in 1977. The craters are still there, still fenced off, still too hot to touch. This is the moment the atomic age stopped being a weapon and became a mess nobody knew how to clean up. July 1946, Operation Crossroads. The U.S. Navy anchored 95 captured and surplus warships in the Bikini Lagoon to find out what an atomic bomb does to a fleet. 42,000 men, 242 ships, more than half of the world's supply of motion picture film loaded into cameras pointed at the lagoon. The first bomb, dropped from the air, missed its aim point by 600 meters and sank only 5 ships. The press called it a dud. The Navy looked almost reassured. Then came Baker. 24 days later, the second bomb was detonated 90 feet underwater, directly beneath the fleet. It lifted 2 million tons of the lagoon into the sky, and when that water came back down, it was radioactive. Every ship was coated in it. The Navy's answer was to send sailors back aboard with hoses, scrub brushes, and lie. Many of them shirtless, in shorts, without any way to measure what they were absorbing. The radiation safety team called it hairy-chested indifference. They begged the officers to pull the men off the ships. They were overruled. The scrubbing did not work. The official report concluded that removing contamination of the type encountered could not be accomplished successfully. The third test was canceled. Most of the fleet was towed out to sea and sunk on purpose. Glenn Seaborg, who discovered plutonium and later ran the Atomic Energy Commission, gave Baker a name that stuck: the world's first nuclear disaster. It was not an accident. It was a scheduled test, filmed from every angle, and they still could not clean it up. 80 years of the atomic age, and that lesson arrived in the first month. Every film you just watched was made by a government, paid for by the public, and then quietly forgotten. There are hundreds more sitting in the archive. If you want to see more of them, the best thing you can do is simple. Hit like, subscribe, ring the bell. It costs you nothing, and it decides whether this channel gets to keep digging. Tell me in the comments which story stayed with you. Thank you for watching. This is ChronixTV. Uncover the Forgotten.